Thank you very much. And it is a pleasure to address the conference again, as you said, sadly, virtually once again, which we'd hope to avoid this year. But let's hope we're close to turning the corner on this pandemic and endless COVID restrictions, and that we will be able to return to normal next year. Now, today, I just wanted to set out a little bit of further detail about our future agriculture policy. And to start with, I think it's important to note that EU area payments that we've all come used to in the last 15 years or so are a relatively new concept. They came out of the 2003 CAP reform, and in some ways they were born out of an economist's obsession with so-called decoupling. But what's become increasingly apparent in recent years is that a subsidy on land ownership or land tenure can be every bit as distorting as an old-style production subsidy. It's inflated land rents. It's caused people to hold on to land just to collect the payment when they might otherwise rent that land out. And with hindsight, therefore, the advent of area-based subsidies was probably a mistake in my view. A better approach with hindsight might have been to, first of all, start to introduce environmental conditionality to the previous support regime that was in place. Secondly, to progressively reduce the size of those subsidies and to simultaneously increase the payment rates in the agri-environment schemes in the old Pillar 2 of the Common Agricultural Policy. And so the concept behind the approach that we are taking now to future policy is fundamentally different to that which we inherited from the EU. Whereas the EU regime was very much a single subsidy based on land ownership and land tenure, and then a single complex book of rules that everybody needed to follow. The new approach will be phasing out those subsidies for land ownership and land tenure. It will dispense with that old style, rigid, top-down rule book. And instead, we will be replacing the schemes with new payments to incentivize sustainable farming. Now, these new payments will not begrudge farmers a margin for doing the right thing for the environment. And in that sense, they will represent a departure from the income foregone principle that was used by the European Union. Rates instead will be set at the level needed to incentivize uptake required on the scale we need to deliver our environmental objectives. Now, I know that for understandable reasons, farmers sometimes approach this issue of agriculture policy reform, with the question, how will I recoup the money that I currently receive through BPS? But for government, the question is slightly different. We have now legally binding targets for the environment, most notably a target to reverse the decline in nature by 2030. And we have a responsibility as a government to ensure that the payment rates we make are attractive enough to incentivize the uptake of our schemes on the scale needed so that we can hit the targets we've set ourselves and to which we are legally bound to deliver. So the key difference with our future scheme is that we are seeking willing participants who are attracted to the schemes because of the payment rates we're making. The new schemes will be modular. Some businesses may embrace the scheme at all its levels and embrace it with a high level of ambition. But for other businesses, it may be a smaller part of their overall business model. The key thing is that the choice will be theirs. And the shape of our future policy is already starting to emerge, and we're already rolling out elements of it. We have already launched our new animal health and welfare pathway. This means that any livestock farmer who's currently a claimant of BPS will be entitled to a funded visit from a vet once a year to put in place an animal health strategy. Now, we know that for many farm businesses, calling the vet is an expensive business, usually reserved for times of crisis, often in the middle of the night when something's going wrong when they're calving a cow. But we also know that the difference between the best financial performance on livestock enterprises and those that are suffering from poor profitability is often very closely linked to animal health on the farm. And we know that if we can reduce mortality on farms, if we can reduce conditions such as mastitis in the cattle sector, and if we can address issues such as lameness in the sheep sector, these can all have a direct impact on a farm enterprise's profitability. And so having an annual visit from a vet with a more strategic focus about how to enhance animal health on an individual holding, I think could have a really powerful impact. I've had some farmers say to me, well, I already do this, in which case they will now receive a payment for something they already do. But for those who don't already do this, I hope that they will take up this payment, since it's not going to cost them anything to do it. And we will be rolling out other components of support to enhance animal health and welfare in the future. We've also set out already plans for the sustainable farming incentive. This is all about trying to incentivize a more sustainable approach to farming right across the farmed landscape. Initially, we're focusing on promoting soil health, but there will be future modules on things like sensitive hedgerow management and integrated pest management. Now, I know that some of the green NGOs were critical of the sustainable farming incentive when it was launched late last year, but I totally reject that criticism. The truth is that we will never deliver our targets for the environment unless we see some changes across the farmed landscape. The way that we manage our soils is inextricably linked to the quality of our watercourses, which has a direct impact on many of our protected sites. And we know that hedgerows are probably the single most important ecological building block that we have in the farmed landscape, and how we manage them matters. And we know that if we can incentivize integrated pest management and get a general reduction in pesticide use, that will also have an impact on invertebrates and things like pollinators. So it's going to be a crucial part of our approach to delivering the environmental targets that we've set ourselves. But today I want to say a bit more about the other two components of our future agriculture policy. That is local nature recovery and landscape recovery. Local nature recovery will replace the existing countryside stewardship schemes. Most holdings have a part of the farm that is perhaps not really suitable for crop production, or less productive, or difficult to work. There is an opportunity to make those parts of the holding a special space for nature. And it could be a part of a field, could be an area in a valley that's particularly suited to this, where there's an opportunity to create water features and ponds, to establish woodland creation within that farmed holding, to establish species-rich grassland, and to replicate some of the conditions of the traditional meadows, many of which we've lost, and to create breeding areas for wildlife. We've learned from the pilots that there's also a great deal of interest in partnership working, some real enthusiasm for groups of farmers in a particular geography coming together to do projects jointly. And we've made available facilitation funding to support that kind of partnership working, which has been so popular. And that will also be a feature of the new local nature recovery scheme. But in the meantime, we of course have countryside stewardship. And I want to say today that farmers should regard the countryside stewardship scheme as a bridge to local nature recovery. Last year, we saw a 40% increase in demand and applications for countryside stewardship. We now have over 40,000 farmers in England participating in either countryside stewardship or legacy HLS schemes. And we also know that if we can increase the numbers involved in this scheme, then it increases those who are prepared for the new local nature recovery scheme. So today, I can also announce that we are increasing the payment rates for countryside stewardship. It changes for different types of interventions, but on average, we are going to increase rates in countryside stewardship by around 30%. Now, this sends a powerful signal to farmers that we want them to get involved in countryside stewardship. For those who are early adopters and have already been engaged in countryside stewardship, they will automatically see an increase in the payments they receive for the work that they are already doing. But for those who've not yet engaged with countryside stewardship, the 40,000 or so who've chosen not to so far, I would urge them all to look again at countryside stewardship. We've made it simpler. We've removed some of the stifling bureaucracy that was a feature during the EU era, and we are, as I say, increasing those payment rates. Now, the final component of our future policy is landscape recovery. And this is going to be about much more fundamental land use change. To begin with, we're looking for 15 projects ranging in size from around 500 hectares to 5,000 hectares. It could be individual landowners or groups of landowners coming together. And one of the experiences and lessons that we've learned from projects like NEP, which is obviously a very radical rewilding experiment, is that sometimes if you let go of the reins and allow nature to reestablish itself and have a nature-led recovery of habitats, you can see some quite significant changes in a relatively short time frame. And the focus of the landscape recovery scheme is going to be very much, firstly, on recovering threatened species in England, and secondly, to support that objective, also delivering the recovery of priority habitats. Now, I should say that the types of projects we envisage under landscape recovery won't be right for every farm business or every farm holding. And indeed, they probably won't be right for most farm businesses, but it will be right for some. And it will enable us to support a choice that some landowners may want to take. But we won't be requiring anybody to enter these schemes. We will be putting in place the right incentives, the right kind of payment rates to support the choices of those who would like to do so. Now, it's important that we recognize the truth around land use. If we're to deliver the targets we've set ourselves for woodland creation in England, around 10,000 hectares of trees per year, and if we're to deliver our objective of getting 300,000 hectares of land where habitat is restored, there is inevitably going to be a degree of land use change. And I know that that causes some people some concern. But you have to look at the numbers we're looking at in the overall context of the fact that we have some 9.3 million hectares of farmland in England. And so we are only looking at change taking place on a relatively small area of that land. We, of course, need to keep a very close eye on food security. And as I said earlier, the government now has a legal responsibility to review our food security every 3 years. The first report of that food security review was published shortly before Christmas, and it shows that we have strong levels of self-sufficiency in many sectors at the moment. We also know that there isn't a direct correlation between the amount of land that is farmed and our agricultural output. Indeed, much of the growth we've had in agricultural output has come from sectors such as poultry and horticulture, which use very little land. And around 60% of our agricultural output comes from just 30% of land. So we know that it is entirely possible to maintain our food production, indeed to increase our food production, but to do so in a more sustainable way in some areas, and to also see some land use change in some other areas. Finally, it's important that we keep a close eye on farm profitability. As I said earlier, since the 2016 referendum result, farm incomes have generally recovered. Farm incomes and commodity prices are very closely linked to exchange rates and to oil prices, but there's also growing world demand as the population grows and as demand for some proteins also expands. As a result of this, we've seen the price of beef and sheep running at very strong levels. We've seen gross margins in some of the cereal sector increase by around 30%. And it's, of course, difficult to know at this stage how much of that change in farm gate prices is structural and how much of it is temporary. Exchange rates will inevitably change at some point again in the future. But it is possible that there will be some permanent structural change in those farm gate prices. And that's actually quite critical to us ensuring that we have profitable food production in this country. So in conclusion, I've always said that this should be an evolution, not a revolution. That's why we've set out a 7-year transition period. But I hope today I've been able to articulate the clear path that we have towards our final destination and the critical importance that schemes like Countryside Stewardship have to give farmers a bridge from the old schemes to the new. And in designing our future farming policy, we're not just thinking about the farmers of today, important though that is, we're also thinking about the farmers of tomorrow, the farmers we don't yet know, perhaps those who always yearned to go farming but couldn't get access to land. We have a whole generation leaving education today who are probably more environmentally conscious than previous generations. They're valuing different things in their career choices. They want to deliver things that are real and tangible and matter and make a difference. And I think there's an exciting future for the vision that we have for agriculture and sustainable agriculture and the delivery for nature and the environment that can attract that new generation to our industry. Thank you.